In 1991, a storm ripped through rural Minnesota. 3 6-year-old sisters went missing. They were never seen again. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. This story has haunted people for over 3 decades, and what you're about to hear might stay with you long after the video ends. It happened on April 10th, 1991, a Wednesday. That morning had been strangely warm for early spring. Birds were quiet. The trees didn't move. In the town of Clear Rock, Minnesota, population just under 800, the forecast called for strong wind and light rain. But by late afternoon, the clouds turned sickly green. Local farmers say they could feel the pressure shift, like the air was being pulled from their lungs. People started locking windows, unplugging televisions. By 6:30 p.m., sirens were howling across Crow Wing County. A supercell thunderstorm, the kind that spins tornadoes out of the sky like coins off a table, slammed into the region. Wind gusts reached 70 miles per hour. Lightning struck the grain silo just outside of town, setting it ablaze. Power lines snapped and fell into ditches, sparking against the mud. Trees were uprooted, roofs peeled back. Inside a small farmhouse just 6 miles from town, the Whitmore family gathered in their kitchen. Joseph and Marlene Whitmore were high school sweethearts, both raised in Clear Rock. Their daughters, Eleanor, Naomi, and June, were identical triplets, 6 years old, wildly imaginative, inseparable. That evening, as the sky cracked open, the girls sat on the living room rug, coloring with dull crayons under candlelight. The power had already gone out, and the old battery-powered radio sputtered with static before a voice finally broke through. "Severe storm warning in effect for Crow Wing County. Please remain indoors and take shelter." Marlene was in the kitchen, washing out teacups. Joseph stood at the back door, watching the wind whip the trees into frenzied shapes. The house groaned under the pressure of the storm. And then, a sound. Bang! The screen door swung once, then twice. When Joseph turned around, the girls were gone. At first, he assumed they were playing, hiding in the hallway, maybe in their bedroom. But the more rooms he checked, the colder he became. Marlene joined him, and within seconds they were tearing through every closet, every drawer, calling the girls' names over and over again. The front door was still locked, no broken glass, no signs of forced entry. But the back screen door, the one that led to the woods, was wide open, slapping in the wind. By the time Joseph jumped into his pickup and sped off to find help, Marlene was barefoot in the yard, screaming into the wind, her voice drowned by the roar of thunder. The search began within the hour. 3 deputies arrived at the scene, flashlights flickering in the rain. The sheriff followed in a second vehicle, along with 2 neighbors and a fireman from town. They fanned out across the Whitmore property, yelling, searching, scanning the grass, the trees, the shed, the old well. Nothing. No muddy footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle. Just emptiness. The triplets' rain boots were still lined up by the door. Their jackets were still hanging on the hooks in the hallway. It was as if the girls had simply stepped out of the world. By midnight, more volunteers had joined the search. A helicopter was requested from Duluth. K-9 units arrived. The dogs picked up a scent, briefly, near the edge of the field, but it vanished 20 feet from the house, a scent trail cut clean off, like it had never existed. The storm had made a mess of everything: footprints, tire tracks, broken branches. The land had been churned by wind and water, wiped of any trail they might have left. At dawn, the sheriff made the call to notify the media. 3 6-year-old sisters, missing without a trace. Over the next few days, the entire town of Clear Rock was involved. Kids were pulled out of school. Teachers walked through the woods with sticks and whistles. Farmers drove their ATVs through ravines. Local churches held prayer circles. But nothing turned up, Not a jacket, not a shoe, not a scream heard by anyone. The state police arrived, then the FBI. Investigators from Minneapolis were flown in. The family was questioned. The property was scanned with ground-penetrating radar, and yet, no evidence, no signs, no suspects. Only a water-damaged crayon drawing found under the couch, 3 girls standing in a field, holding hands. Behind them, a large black figure with no face. As days turned into weeks, rumors began to bloom. Some said wolves had gotten them, but no blood was found. Others whispered that someone local had planned this, and the storm was just a convenient cover. And then there were the more unsettling ideas. That the woods out behind the Whitmore farm were wrong, had always been wrong. That strange lights had been seen out there during storms in the past. That radio signals went dead when you drove through that stretch. That back in 1913, 3 other children had disappeared within a mile of the same tree line. The Whitmore house went quiet. The girls' bedroom was left untouched. Their dolls sat in a row on the windowsill for years, and still, no bodies, no leads. Just a story that began to feel less like a tragedy and more like a curse. But that story, it wasn't over. Because in 2024, 33 years later, something was found. Something that had been hidden in that house since the very beginning. By the morning after the storm, the case of the missing Whitmore triplets had become the only thing anyone in Clear Rock could talk about. A notice went out over the local radio station at 7:42 a.m., asking for help from any and all able-bodied residents. And within the hour, dozens of trucks, ATVs, and pickup caravans gathered in the gravel lot behind the town's small fire station. Farmers, teachers, teenagers, and retired veterans grabbed flashlights, boots, maps. The diner shut down. The post office stayed closed. Even the local bar left its doors locked. Everyone joined the search. The town moved as one organism, wide-eyed, heavy-hearted, and desperate to find 3 girls who had vanished as if plucked from the earth. The search teams were divided by county lines and topography. Some were sent to the marshy stretch west of the Whitmore farm. Others combed the dense tree line to the east, or followed the creek bed that twisted behind the nearby quarry. Dozens of volunteers climbed through barbed fences and knee-deep mud, calling out the names Eleanor, Naomi, June, until their voices gave out. Search dogs from Duluth and St. Cloud were brought in, trained for missing persons and wilderness retrieval. And for a fleeting moment, there was hope. One of the dogs caught a scent. It pulled hard, barking and lunging, leading its handler straight toward the north field until it stopped abruptly, tail down, confused. The scent vanished 20 feet from the back porch, as if someone had lifted the girls into the sky. That detail, the invisible cutoff, would become a myth of its own in the years to follow. By the 3rd day, news crews had descended on Clear Rock. Reporters in windbreakers stood in muddy fields holding microphones. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotor blades stirring up loose straw and broken branches. Satellite vans lined the main road. A CNN anchor dubbed it the Minnesota Triplets tragedy. Cameras focused on Marlene Whitmore as she exited the sheriff's station, clutching a raincoat against her chest, visibly shaking. A day later, Joseph appeared on camera in front of the family home, his jaw clenched, eyes hollow. "You're not helping," he growled at a cameraman. "You're feeding on it." Still, the footage played on national TV for weeks. The image of the girls' missing poster, 3 identical school photos side by side, became burned into the national consciousness. For weeks, the search continued. Boats dragged the river. Crews scanned caves, drones buzzed above the forest canopy. Psychics sent letters. FBI agents interviewed every person who had ever set foot on the Whitmore property. But by summer, the effort slowed. Leads dried up. People moved on. By 1993, there were no suspects, no arrests, no remains. And for many, no hope. But Clear Rock didn't forget. Every year on April 10th, no matter the weather, residents gathered in the park across from the church. They lit candles and said prayers and read poems. The triplets' names were whispered like a lullaby. Eleanor, Naomi, June. Some years, only 20 people came. Other years, it was closer to 200. But the tradition endured. The house stayed standing. Marlene and Joseph never moved. The girls' room remained frozen in time, their beds neatly made, drawings taped to the wall, toys untouched. By the early 2000s, the case had developed a mythology of its own. Some believed the storm had masked a carefully planned kidnapping. Others blamed cult activity in the region. There had been old rumors of pagan gatherings deep in the woods during the 70s. More conspiratorial minds spoke of secret underground tunnels, of government experiments, of something hidden beneath the town itself. And then there were the other stories, the ones whispered by high schoolers during sleepovers or dared around campfires. Stories about people seeing 3 shadowy figures standing at the edge of the Whitmore Woods, about hearing children laughing in the cornfields after midnight, about radios cutting out or compasses spinning in circles when you got too close to the property. Of course, most people wrote these off as folklore. Grief turned into ghost stories, trauma shaping memory. A way for a town to cope with something too impossible to explain, but the pain that never faded. And the parents? They lived in that pain every single day. They kept their porch light on for 33 years. They waited. And then, in 2024, something shifted. A sealed wall was opened, a room was found, and the story, the one everyone thought they knew, would never be the same. The search eventually ended. The flyers came down, the news vans drove off, the helicopters went silent, but the house on County Road 12, the Whitmore house, never moved, and neither did its owners. Marlene and Joseph Whitmore stayed. They refused to sell, refused to remodel, refused to erase even 1 inch of memory. The girls' rain boots remained lined up by the back door for years. Their toothbrushes, untouched, still sat in a ceramic cup on the bathroom sink. The magnets on the fridge never changed, the one spelling out EJN, in pastel letters. The bedroom? Frozen in time. 3 twin beds, spaced evenly. Matching blankets with faded cartoon animals. A dollhouse in the corner, half lit by the sunlight that poured through the curtains each morning. On the walls, family drawings and scribbled rainbows that had begun to yellow with age. Every night, Marlene dusted the shelves. Every Sunday, she read a bedtime story aloud. Always the same one. Goodnight Moon. She never closed the door behind her. The tragedy didn't just steal their children, it swallowed their marriage too. Joseph grew bitter, withdrawn. He spent long hours working odd jobs around town, eventually taking a graveyard shift at the gas station just off Route 11. He stopped shaving, started smoking again. When people asked how he was doing, he just nodded. Marlene, on the other hand, moved inward. She started writing letters to each daughter every birthday. Not long letters, just updates. Your old dog Max is still kicking. Your cousin Sarah made varsity. I dreamed of you standing at the end of my bed, smiling. Each letter was sealed, labeled, and stored in a wooden box beneath her bed. By 2005, there were 42 of them. Neighbors noticed. People whispered. Some offered comfort. Others avoided them completely. They never left that moment, said one longtime friend in a 2011 local interview. You could see it in their eyes. They were still standing in that storm. Another neighbor recalled something stranger. I remember once, a few years back, Marlene came running over to my porch, out of breath. She said she'd heard laughter coming from the woods behind the house, 3 girls, laughing. Then it just stopped. She swore she wasn't dreaming. Joseph had his moment too. In 2008, during a thunderstorm, he told a friend he'd woken up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As he passed the hallway leading to the girls' room, he saw 3 dark shapes standing just outside the door. Still. Silent. When he flipped the light switch, they were gone. He never told Marlene. For a while, people assumed the Whitmores would eventually move, maybe try to rebuild their lives somewhere else. But they never did. They hosted no holidays, no birthdays, no guests. Their phone number never changed. Neither did Joseph's voicemail. "You've reached the Whitmores. Leave a message and we'll call you back." Marlene insisted on keeping it the same. "Just in case," she'd say. "What if they remember the number?" Years passed. Towns change. Faces come and go. But in Clear Rock, the Whitmore house became its own kind of landmark. A living museum of grief. Kids rode their bikes past it quietly. Teens dared each other to sneak up and knock on the door. Most never did. Some people said if you drove by at night, you could see lights on in the girls' room, even though no one had entered it in decades. And then came 2024. After more than 3 decades of stillness, of sadness, of unanswered questions, Joseph finally agreed to remodel the room. Not to forget, but because the memories had begun to turn sour. The quiet had become too loud. He told Marlene he just wanted to paint, maybe give the room new life. What they found behind that wall would change everything. By 2012, most people outside of Clear Rock had stopped talking about the Whitmore triplets. Time, as it tends to do, had pushed the tragedy to the dusty corners of public memory. But for the locals, especially those who'd grown up with the story, the shadow of that storm never really left. And then, something strange happened. Just 2 miles from the Whitmore property, a young couple moved into a long, abandoned farmhouse. The lot had sat vacant for nearly a decade, overgrown and half-swallowed by weeds. Locals said it was bad land. Nothing grew right, birds avoided it, and the wind always seemed to change direction when you stood in the backyard. The couple, Dean and Tara, weren't superstitious. They were DIY types, eager to renovate. They brought their golden retriever, Max, and got to work clearing brush, fixing windows, rebuilding the old barn that had partially collapsed. That's when Max began acting strange. It started small, pacing, whining at the barn door at night, barking into the empty dark like he saw something just out of reach. Then came the scratching. He'd stand by the side of the barn, same spot every time, and scratch wildly at the dirt floor, like he was trying to dig something out. Dean assumed it was mice, or some old food buried years earlier. But no traps worked. No digging revealed anything. Just packed, dry earth. One night in early September, the dog refused to come back inside. They left the porch light on, went to bed. In the morning, Max was gone. They searched the property, called neighbors, posted flyers. Nothing. Dean even dug up the crawl space beneath the barn, just to prove there was nothing down there. He found a cracked metal vent cover and a length of old rope, half buried. But no sign of the dog. Eventually, they stopped mentioning it. But the barn? They never rebuilt it. Months later, a group of local teens, hearing about the weird happenings, dared each other to camp out near the barn. One of them brought a camcorder, hoping to catch ghost footage for a YouTube video. They lasted until 2 a.m. All 3 claimed they heard children laughing. Not playful laughter, but distant, echoing. Like it was coming from beneath them. One kid later said it felt like the ground was breathing. The footage they recorded was mostly static and low wind. But in the background, for about 6 seconds, there's a faint sound. 3 quick giggles. Then silence. The video got maybe 400 views, but in Clear Rock, it was the talk of the year. Then, in 2015, a boy named Eric, just 10 years old, visited the property with his grandfather, who'd been hired to clear debris. Eric wandered off, as kids do, and wound up exploring the barn ruins. He tripped on a loose floorboard, and when he pulled it back, he found something strange wedged between two rotted beams, a rusted, dirt-caked toy. It was a small plastic horse, one wheel missing, paint faded. He showed it to his grandfather, who thought nothing of it. But when Eric's mother saw it later that night, she froze, because she had grown up in Clear Rock. And she remembered the missing poster. She remembered the old family photo that was printed in the paper and shown on the news, the triplets in matching dresses, one of them clutching a little red horse. The same one. The toy was handed over to police. No official statements were made, no arrests, no leads reopened. But the people in town knew what it meant. Because that barn? It sat directly in line with the back of the Whitmore property, almost as if something had moved beneath their feet. And then, years later, that same direction would lead Joseph and Marlene to break open a wall in their own house, a wall that had remained sealed since the storm. And what they found there? It would finally begin to peel back the edge of the story. By 2024, the Whitmore house had aged like grief does, quietly and all at once. Its paint had peeled. The shingles were loose. The carpet in the upstairs hallway had gone threadbare under years of pacing. But the girls' bedroom, it remained untouched. A museum, a memory, a mausoleum. Until one evening that spring, Marlene stood in the doorway, staring at the soft pink wallpaper, now faded to a sickly beige. "It's time," she whispered. Joseph didn't say a word. The plan was simple. Paint over the walls, maybe install new flooring. Not to forget, just to breathe again. It was during the closet clean-out, behind a sagging stack of boxes, that Joseph noticed it. A seam. Not part of the original layout. A false panel, maybe 2 feet wide, tightly fitted, sealed with rusted nails and a thick line of dried adhesive. He ran his hand along it and froze. Scratched faintly into the wood, almost childlike, were 3 letters. ENJ, Eleanor, Naomi, June, the triplets. Joseph called for Marlene. She didn't respond at first. She was sitting on the edge of the bed holding one of June's old stuffed animals. But when she saw it, her face drained of color. Neither of them spoke. Joseph grabbed a crowbar. The first nail snapped with a sickening pop. The second bent like it was resisting, but finally, with a groan of old wood and a plume of dust, the panel came free. Behind it was darkness, and a draft, not cold but stale. Joseph held up a flashlight. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel, maybe 3 feet wide, shored up with timber beams and crawling with cobwebs. Dry earth, undisturbed. Someone had built it. The authorities were called immediately. Within hours, the house was surrounded with crime scene tape. A forensic team arrived from the county, followed by a structural engineer. They documented everything: temperature, air quality, even the soil composition inside the tunnel. Their verdict: whatever this is, it hasn't been touched in decades. The tunnel ran about 20 feet and ended in a small, rounded room, no more than 6 feet across. Just enough space for a child to lie down. Inside, they found 3 worn blankets, rolled tightly and stacked. Along the walls, dozens of drawings had been scrawled in pencil and charcoal. Some of them faded beyond recognition, others still shockingly vivid. One showed 3 stick figures, labeled with childlike handwriting. Me, Sissy, Sissy. But next to them was a 4th figure, taller, featureless. Just a head and body. No face, no eyes, no name. Just black scribbles where its face should have been. There was no electricity, no light source, no toys, no food wrappers. And yet, the space looked lived in, like someone had spent real time there, or had been kept there. The Whitmores were kept out of the room for days while investigators worked. When they were finally allowed to see it, Marlene didn't speak. She just stared at the wall with the faceless figure. And then she whispered, "They drew that in preschool once." Joseph turned to her, confused. She nodded. "I threw it away." Nothing about the tunnel made sense. It wasn't part of the home's original design, and yet no one, no builder, no plumber, no contractor who'd ever worked on the house, recalled anything like it. The wood used for the supports dated to the early 1990s, matching the storm, matching the disappearance. But the soil above it had never been disturbed. No sinkholes, no erosion, no construction marks. It was as if the tunnel had always been there, waiting. Police wouldn't comment on whether the room suggested the girls had been hidden there, but forensic teams discovered fragments of clothing woven into the blankets, hair samples, partial fingerprints, all degraded, all inconclusive. Still, the question clawed at the town like frostbite. Had the girls been in that room while search teams scoured the backyard? And if so, who built it? And more chilling still, who else had been down there with them? On the far wall of the room, drawn in black crayon, was a final image. 3 girls standing at a window. Above them, a dark sky, stars, lightning. And beside them, a 4th figure, its hand resting on one of the girls' shoulders. The discovery of the hidden room rocked Clear Rock to its core. But the story didn't stop there. While forensics continued examining the narrow chamber, one of the investigators noticed that the floorboards near the tunnel's mouth, the part closest to the original closet, seemed newer than the rest of the hardwood. Slightly off color, recently replaced, or maybe concealed. They pulled the boards back and found something wedged between the joists. A metal box, rusted around the corners, sealed with 2 latches and a thin chain wrapped 3 times around the handle. It was heavy, covered in dust. Inside, a stack of VHS tapes. There were 9 of them, each one hand-labeled in faded marker. October 1991, December 1991, February 1992, all the way to April 1994. At first glance, it looked like a family archive. The first tape showed what appeared to be a normal backyard scene. 3 little girls, unmistakably the Whitmore triplets, laughing, playing with dolls on a picnic blanket. The footage was grainy, but intimate. At one point, one of them looks directly at the camera and waves. The voice behind the camera responds warmly. "Good girl, Ellie." But it wasn't Joseph's voice, or Marlene's. It was someone else. A man, calm, soft-spoken, almost rehearsed. That alone was enough to shake the parents to the core. Joseph stood in the evidence room, fists clenched as the footage played. Marlene sat frozen, her eyes wide, like her body was watching, but her mind had left the room entirely. "Where was this?" she asked softly. The investigator didn't answer. The second tape was different. Gone was the sunny yard. Now the girls sat on thin blankets in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were bare, no windows, no doors visible. A single bulb swung slowly overhead, casting long shadows that wavered across their tiny faces. But they weren't crying. They weren't begging to go home. They were quiet. One hummed softly to herself. Another was drawing on a piece of paper. The third just stared ahead, blinking slowly, like she hadn't slept in days. A voice, the same from the first tape, spoke again. "They're doing very well. Almost ready now." "Ready for what?" Joseph snapped at the screen. No one could answer. Tape after tape followed the same pattern. The girls aged slowly across the recordings, hair a bit longer, faces a bit leaner. In some, they were dressed identically. In others, they wore oversized clothes that didn't seem to fit. One tape showed them practicing a song, something that sounded like a nursery rhyme. But the melody was off, just dissonant enough to be unsettling. The final tape in the box, April 1994, was the most disturbing. It began with static. Then a frame appeared. The same room, but this time lit only by candlelight. The camera sat on the floor, angled slightly upward. The girls were there, sitting side by side. But they weren't alone. A tall figure stood behind them, wearing a long black coat. His face was never shown, always obscured by the flicker of the candle or the angle of the shot. He didn't speak, he didn't move, he just watched. The tape ended abruptly. A high-pitched whine cut through the final seconds, followed by white noise. Then nothing. Back in the evidence room, an officer rewound the tape and paused it at the final frame. Zoomed in. There, in the background, etched faintly into the concrete wall, was a symbol. A circle, 3 small marks inside it, and one larger mark outside, watching. The same symbol that had been found on the drawing in the hidden room. The same symbol that would soon be found elsewhere. For the Whitmores, the tapes were a nightmare made real. Proof that their daughters hadn't simply vanished. They'd been taken, kept, conditioned. But by who? And why? And how had no one seen it? Marlene collapsed in the hallway outside the station. She was treated for shock. Joseph didn't speak for days. But what haunted him the most wasn't the voice. It wasn't the room. It was the moment in the very first tape when one of the girls, Naomi, he thought, turned to the camera, smiled, and whispered something just low enough that no one could make it out. It sounded like, "We're okay." But they weren't. They weren't okay. And someone, somewhere, had watched all of this, without ever being seen. The discovery of the tapes gave investigators more than they expected. Not just eerie footage, but audio anomalies. Each VHS recording was run through enhanced filtering software to recover background sounds, hoping to identify environmental cues, distant traffic, birds, passing trains. What they found was stranger. In nearly every video, even the quietest, there was a humming. Low, mechanical, rhythmic, not quite musical, not wind, not pipes. It didn't match any known interference patterns from VCR machines either. It was always there, like breathing, like presence. One audio tech at the state lab described it as sounding electrical but alive. Another ran it through spectrogram software. The visual pattern looked like a heartbeat, steady, pulsing, almost sentient. It wasn't just eerie, it was intentional. That was the first breadcrumb that led them to look beyond the house. Investigators returned to the Whitmore home with ground-penetrating radar, following the direction of the hidden tunnel, which, they discovered, wasn't just a random chamber. It had been built to aim somewhere. The path led northeast, beyond the Whitmore's property line, and straight toward a neighboring lot that had sat vacant since the early 2000s. Overgrown. Forgotten. A rusted-out mailbox still bore the name M. Krause. To outsiders, it was just another patch of rural land. To locals, it was the old Krause property, once home to a man named Martin Krause, who'd disappeared in 1988 under unusual circumstances. Krause had been a quiet man, lived alone, rarely seen in town. Some said he was brilliant, a former university researcher who studied comparative mythology. Others said he ran a group of free thinkers who met by firelight and believed children were the key to spiritual enlightenment. The local paper only ran one story after he vanished. Loner leaves behind library of strange symbols. Police never declared it foul play. He just vanished. The team surveyed his old land. Toward the back, behind an overgrown thicket of blackberry bushes and thorn vines, they found it. A collapsed storm cellar, partially hidden by debris, half swallowed by time. Cleared and reinforced, the opening revealed a stone stairwell descending into dry darkness. At the bottom, a low-ceilinged room carved directly into the earth. It smelled of dust, metal, and mold. But something else, too. Something faintly sweet and bitter. Inside were remnants of what could only be called a residence. Rotten cushions, empty food cans from the early 90s, torn scraps of clothing, and on the walls, covering every inch of surface, were drawings. Circles, stars, stick figures. The same faceless being from the girl's art, drawn again and again, sometimes towering over the children, sometimes holding hands, sometimes with rays like a halo, other times with flames pouring from its head. The investigator stood in silence. One finally whispered, "This isn't just shelter, this is worship." In the far corner, beneath a tarp and a pile of soot-covered books, they found it. A photograph. The image was faded, discolored, likely water-damaged, but clear enough. 3 girls, unmistakably the Whitmore triplets. Standing together, arms around each other, smiles forced and tight. And beside them, a man in a black coat. His face had been scribbled out in thick black crayon, viciously, repeatedly. The marks dug deep into the photo like a child had tried to erase something, not just hide it, but destroy it. On the back of the photo, written in the same childish hand, he said, "Don't look." The photograph was dated March 1994. The same month the final VHS tape was recorded. Meaning that even after the tapes stopped, someone was still with them. Authorities searched the entire property. No human remains, no fingerprints, no clear identity for the figure in the photo. But deep in one of the notebooks left behind, a spiral-bound journal filled with cryptic notes and strange references to transference, ritual bonds, and something repeatedly called the fourth light. Investigators found a familiar symbol, 3 circles inside a larger one, and just outside of that, an eye. The same symbol seen in the triplets' crayon drawings. The same one etched into the tunnel wall back at the Whitmore house. Was it a cult? A rogue caregiver? A fringe recluse who believed in something darker? Or something beyond explanation? No one could say. But one thing was clear. Someone had been watching those girls for a very long time. And he hadn't just hidden them. He'd kept them, changed them, and believed he had a purpose. By the summer of 2024, forensic teams had exhausted the hidden room and the storm cellar. The physical trail was thin. No bodies, no remains. Just artifacts. Clothes, hair, sketches, and the haunting collection of VHS tapes. But one breakthrough came when the lab completed DNA analysis on fibers pulled from the blankets found in the tunnel. The results were undeniable. Eleanor, Naomi, and June Whitmore had lived in that space. Not for a night, not for a week, for years. From late 1991 to at least early 1995, biological markers confirmed they'd inhabited that hidden space. Their scent, skin cells, even food residue traced across surfaces told a story the town wasn't prepared to hear. They had been alive, nearby, and somehow never found. But that only opened new questions. What happened after 1995? Why had the tapes stopped? Who sealed the tunnel? And then came something even more disturbing. While searching around the rear edge of the Whitmore property, near where the tunnel would have passed underground, a deputy stumbled upon something unusual. A boot print, perfectly preserved in the dry earth under a set of bramble bushes that hadn't been disturbed in decades. But the tread was wrong. It wasn't from the 90s. It matched a modern brand, a type of steel-toe work boot sold online since 2019. And the kicker? It led toward the Whitmore house, not away from it. Whoever it belonged to had walked toward the home, quietly, recently. Then, 2 weeks later, an envelope appeared on the Whitmore's porch. There was no postmark, no address, no handwriting on the front, just sealed paper, as though someone had hand-delivered it in the middle of the night. Marlene opened it alone. Inside were 3 pieces of paper, each folded neatly. The first, a crayon drawing. 3 girls standing hand in hand beneath a sun with spirals instead of rays. Each girl was labeled with an initial, E-N-J. The second was even more jarring, a photograph, blurry, faded, shot from a distance, but visible enough to freeze her in place. 3 girls, now in their late teens, maybe early 20s, standing together on what looked like a dusty, cracked desert road. Power lines in the distance, a road sign partially cropped out. The sun behind them cast long shadows, but their postures were clear. One held a piece of paper. On it, in large black marker, "Still together." Marlene dropped the photo. Joseph picked it up, stared at it, and whispered, "That's them." The cheekbones. The way June's foot turned inward, Naomi's hair clipped short. Even Eleanor's left hand, still missing the tip of her pinky from a childhood accident. It couldn't be faked. But where were they? Law enforcement analyzed the photo for metadata. Nothing. Facial recognition ran into a wall, too blurry, too far. Satellite comparisons of the terrain suggested the location might be New Mexico or parts of southern Utah. But there was no trail to follow. The case was cracked wide open, and yet the core remained sealed. Local news caught wind of the story, then regional outlets, then a TikTok thread with millions of views overnight. People began speculating that the girls weren't missing. They had been raised elsewhere, perhaps willingly, perhaps brainwashed. Some claimed to have seen them. Others accused the parents. Others claimed cult involvement, alien abduction, or a cover-up by a government agency long dissolved. What everyone agreed on was this: if they were alive, someone had kept them hidden for 3 decades. And now, they wanted to be seen. The most haunting part came not from the photograph, not from the envelope, but from something scribbled on the back of the final drawing in a child's looping scrawl. The letters uneven, but unmistakable. "He's still with us." The moment the blurry photograph surfaced, the Whitmore case went from a tragic cold file to a global obsession. Local law enforcement reclassified it as active for the first time in over 3 decades. FBI analysts joined the investigation. Specialists in cult behavior and survival psychology were called in. But every new theory seemed to loop back into the same black hole. If the triplets were alive, why had they never come home? TikTok lit up with theories. YouTube channels dissected every frame of the leaked image. One creator claimed the girls were part of a lost commune in Arizona. Another claimed to find matching symbols in declassified CIA documents. But the one thing everyone agreed on? The girls were never truly gone. They'd just been elsewhere. Back in Clear Rock, things changed fast. Tourists began stopping at the old Whitmore house to take selfies. Locals left stuffed animals by the front gate. People reported seeing lights in the woods again, flickers that danced just beyond the trees and then disappeared. Some said they heard voices calling in the wind. One child swore she saw 3 girls in white dresses standing in the cornfield. By the time her mother looked, they were gone. Then came the final knock. It happened on a Sunday evening. Rain was coming. The sky hung low with storm clouds like bruises, and the wind had begun to twist through the trees. Joseph and Marlene were sitting in silence when they heard it. 3 slow knocks on the front door. Joseph went first, looked through the peephole. No one. He opened the door. The porch was empty, except for one thing, a small, rectangular object wrapped in clear plastic sitting perfectly centered on the welcome mat. He bent down and picked it up. A cassette tape. No note, no markings, no return address. They brought it inside, dusted off the old tape deck they hadn't touched since 1994, and pressed play. At first, silence. Then a soft hum, static, like a wind tunnel. And then, singing. 3 young voices, delicate, off-key, familiar. "Rain, Rain, come again. Take us where we've always been." A pause. "Rain, Rain, don't forget. The place where shadows never set." Marlene pressed stop. Her hands were shaking. Joseph said nothing, just stared at the tape, then at the door. Outside, the first crack of thunder rolled across the plains. The case remains active, but no new evidence has surfaced. The photograph was real. The voices were real. But the triplets? They remain a whisper, a legend, a shadow at the edge of the field. And sometimes, when the rain rolls in and the power flickers, those who live near the old Whitmore house say you can hear it again, a lullaby carried in the storm winds, just quiet enough to make you doubt your own ears. "Rain, Rain, oh, come again. Take us where we've always been." Let it echo, let it haunt. Let the viewers scroll straight to the comments, shaken, gripped, and ready to hit replay.